Generation Z, a generation that was both lucky and unlucky. A generation that was fortunate enough to live in an era of accessible information and unlucky enough to live to see the golden age. I belong to this generation, and like most others, I wonder if things really were better back then. Our parents and grandparents have their own apartments, stable jobs, and an education that was accessible. But what about now? Real estate prices are rising, wages are stagnating, education and housing are becoming less and less affordable, and crises have become commonplace for our generation. If you stumbled upon this video, you likely belong to Generation Z, and you've likely asked yourself, how doomed is Generation Z? Or is it? How capable are we really of changing anything? So let's find out.
Let's start with the most interesting point, the generation gap, a gap that characterizes different generations. The older generation has foundations that worked then and therefore, in their opinion, work now. We, however, see the big picture differently, through the prism of technologies that our parents, for one reason or another, ignore. Meanwhile, we listen to their advice, but they don't listen to ours. And this is partly understandable. Experience will always trump 21st century innovations. A teacher can't be younger than a student. But this creates the first problem for our generation. We are on our own. No one has our back or understands us. It's not good, but it's not bad either. Because unlike the previous generation, we are much more communicative and able to connect with each other much more quickly. We don't have so many stereotypes, no prejudices. Our strength lies in our unity, which we can achieve in no time.
Apes together, strong!
Okay, I'm kidding, but there's a grain of truth in every joke. But this unity is being stifled by the same generation that raised us. And all this is thanks to the foundations that have formed during the time we did not exist.
Foundations are strange things. They can be relatively harmless on a small scale, or quite dangerous on a large scale. What am I talking about, you ask? My answer is simple. Political system. There are no words that can describe the current global situation. Military conflicts, epidemics, the redistribution of wealth. The hatred of nationalities towards each other is a savage phenomenon in itself, especially when this hatred manifests itself in the form of propaganda used to brainwash us. Sound familiar? When representatives of the older generation, who are much smarter and richer than us, are in power, yet they commit actions that affect us, the younger generation. Now let's imagine the opposite situation. What would happen if our generation were allowed to take power? This question has been troubling me for a long time. On one hand, we could do what would benefit not only us at the top, but also those below and above us. On the other hand, our world isn't perfect, and so corruption could persist, if not worsen. I'm increasingly seeing the following picture. Bright minds are leaving countries where they could achieve great things, but the older generation, guarding their own piggy bank, is keeping them out. They're leaving for places where they'll be valued and where the standard of living is the same, if not better. And so begins an exchange of information, bypassing propaganda. Let's return to the question I posed earlier. Will the world change for the better if we're in charge? I believe so, because our generation doesn't look back. We have no time. We're interested in what's next, what we can do to change both ourselves and those around us for the better. Those who lag behind the pace of progress will never catch up. But progress is driven by another resource, money. And that's where most of our generation falls into depression. I think you know that poor people get poorer with each passing year, while the millionaires and billionaires of our world only get richer. It's a vicious cycle that our generation must escape, solving along the way. Every time our parents tell us that at our age they already had an apartment or house, a car, an education, a stable job, and were starting a family, they forget the most important thing, the difference in prices for everything. from houses and fuel to food and healthcare. When we ask how we can get all this for the same salary as back then, but with prices now significantly higher, I already hear a single answer: work harder and you will be happy. Okay, let's say, work where? The job market is structured in such a way that it's not so much work experience and a diploma that matter, although those are important, but also connections, which we, for obvious reasons, lack. For students these days, living separately from their parents is, in most cases, tantamount to death, because even a part-time job isn't enough to cover rent, let alone dorm room. And then there are all the other unforeseen expenses. Add all this up, and the picture you get is more like an end-of-the-world scenario, where corporations control everything, and we're just paying a subscription to exist. Welcome to Cyberpunk meets Detroit Become Human. And this is all happening now, not 20 or 50 years from now, as in the games. The very fact that apartments are now owned by companies, not people, is already a warning sign. And not just apartments, everything. Have you heard of BlackRock and Vanguard, those companies that own everything? Well, if you dig a little deeper, you'll discover they don't own controlling stakes. Yes, their capital is enormous, but they're not the shadow government many believe.
There's a lot of content online right now that claims everything has already been divided up, that the world is controlled by a few companies and we're just extras in someone else's game. The problem isn't that these ideas are completely made up. The problem is that they simplify a complex system into a single villain. And complex systems rarely work that simply. The hysteria around a shadow government doesn't arise out of nowhere. The concentration of capital is real. Corporate influence is real. But reality is more complex than a TikTok headline. The system isn't a comic book monster, it's a mechanism. The housing market is the same mechanism. The stock exchange, where price depends on demand, drives prices higher. The higher the demand, the higher the price. And the solution to this problem is extremely simple: a strategy of unity. Apes together means strength in this context, taking on a completely different meaning. If the market is unstable, relying on a single source of income becomes risky. One source is the security of the past generation. Multiple sources are an adaptation to our times. And this isn't about working without sleep. It's about not staking your future on one company, one employer, or one economy. Yes, many of us will live with our parents longer. This doesn't sound like a success, but using this time as a strategic resource isn't a weakness, but a phase of accumulation. For the older generation, this seems like regression. For us, it's simply a new starting point. But our generation has another, more positive trait that offsets the shortcomings I mentioned earlier. Not completely, yes, but at least partially. This skill is the ability to adapt to any conditions, even the most unfavorable. A clear example of this is the 2020 pandemic.
We're often told that the system has become ossified, that everything is already distributed, that large structures control every step. But if this is true, why did 2020 feel like controlled chaos? Every sector was hit: the economy, healthcare, logistics, education, the labor market. Life came to a standstill, literally. Borders closed, businesses ground to a halt, Wall Street was in chaos due to falling markets. You'd think a system built on total control would grind to a halt, but something else happened. In a matter of months, millions of people switched to remote work. Companies restructured processes. Education became remote. Telemedicine became widespread. Digital services grew exponentially. What was considered impossible or too complicated for years was realized in a matter of months. This doesn't mean the system is perfect. It means it's flexible. Capital hasn't disappeared. It's been redistributed. Where some industries collapsed, others emerged that are still operating today. Tech companies gained strength. Online services gained users. Remote work became the norm. If control had been static, the rise and fall would not have been so dramatic. This was a shift, not the end of the system, not its absolute victory, but a transformation. We saw with our own eyes that the system is vulnerable and adaptive, and change happens as quickly as possible. It's at this point that we begin to notice that there's no absolute control. It's an equation with too many variables that are difficult to predict, but that's not a bad thing for us. Our generation entered adulthood at this very moment. We saw how the familiar order crumbled, how quickly rules changed, and how the digital environment became the foundation of everything. We are not a generation of stability. We are a generation of turbulence. But turbulence isn't just a risk, it's a window of opportunity that each of us can seize if we have the courage and intelligence. Every major crisis creates a redistribution of capital, skills, and opportunities. And if a system truly changes under pressure, then it has entry points.
We weren't born in a golden age. We were born in a time of transition. We inherited an era where capital is concentrated, housing is expensive, the labor market is unstable, crises are commonplace, and the digital environment controls attention. This isn't an easy start, but it's not a death sentence either. 2020 has shown us the most important thing. The world isn't frozen. It's not perfect, it's not fair, but it is changing. And if it's changing, it means there's movement, and movement means opportunity. Not for everyone at the same time, not instantly, not without risk, but opportunity. We are not a generation of stability. We are a generation of turbulence. And turbulence always redistributes capital, influence, skills, roles. Some lose out, some adapt, some surge ahead. And the question isn't whether a few funds control everything, and it's not whether the world will become more just when our generation comes to power. The question is something else. Do we understand the structure of the world well enough to navigate it strategically? Because the system can be tilted, but it's not sealed. And waiting for revolution is a passive stance. Understanding the rules and playing smarter is an active one. We didn't choose the era, but we choose reaction. And if our generation is truly different in any way, it's not by complaints or rebellion, but by our ability to quickly adapt. The world hasn't collapsed, it's being rebuilt. And perhaps our role isn't to destroy it, but to learn to move faster than it.